Ecuatoriana, so a pleasure to be here and represent.
Bienvenida. Stacy?
Hi, Stacy Olivares. I am a Chief Investment Officer. That's my background. One of just a couple, I think, in the United States that are Latina. So I'm a trustee on the CalPERS board, one of the largest public pension plans in the world. KBRA, as you mentioned, the bond rating agency, and Mission Advancement Corp, but also on the board of Core Scientific, which is the largest Bitcoin miner in North America. And I'm a presidential nominee to the Federal Thrift Retirement Board. So I'm really excited about our conversation today and bringing more Latinas on boards. And I'm Mexican.
Great. Oh, great. Anilu?
Hola, very nice to be with everyone, and I love this panel. I have the good fortune of knowing all these ladies, so very, very excited to discuss today. I'm Anilu Vasquez Ubarri. I'm Puerto Rican, and I serve on the board of Upwork, as was mentioned, and TPG Beneficial. I'm also on one of TPG portfolio companies boards, Greenhouse. And my background is I'm a recovering attorney. I started my career in law, in corporate law, and then I moved into the human capital space, joining Goldman Sachs in 2007, and then joined TPG Global, which is a private equity firm, in 2018 as the first chief human resources officer for the firm. So happy to be here with everyone.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So let's dive right into discussing what everyone wants to know. Tell us how you got into your first board. Why don't we start with Anilu?
Yeah, well, it was through a colleague of mine who has known me and knew the company. And I think one of the things that is important is that I had been vocal actually with not only my bosses, but with colleagues that getting on a board was important to me and something that I had as a goal. So I think that's my biggest advice. Tell others that you're interested, because sometimes they'll be able to make the connection that it's a company that may match your interests and you can match their skill set. It's not just all about the search firms. It's really about those connections. So that's how I got my opportunity.
So Bernadette, do you want to go next?
Yeah, so I love that Anilu mentioned that we've all known each other in some capacity. And I think that that's actually what's going to be great about this conversation. I think many of us knew each other when. So back when many of us were even maybe not even thinking or beginning to think about board service, and really had met through professional associations and a number of different spaces, which I think we'll talk a little bit about, kind of building that network, which to Anilu's point, I had a very similar experience. At some point somebody said to me, said, if you're interested, have you mentioned it to anyone? I said no. So for me, my first board actually came from having a conversation with my current CEO at Time Warner, Jeff Bewkes at the time, and mentioning to him that it was something I was interested in. And actually through Time Warner was referred to the very first Board Ready Institute cohort of LCDA, and it was a phenomenal experience to even just begin learning like what it was that I needed to do to even get ready, right? To really be prepared so that when an opportunity came up, I'd be ready to take it. So through the network, that's primarily how my Denny's board came about almost 4 years ago now. And it was through BRI, it was through LCDA, it was through connecting and wonderful people that I got to meet, in particular on the search side. And when that board opportunity came up, I was ready. And so that was my first foray onto my first board.
Wonderful. Stacy, your turn.
Thank you. So
That's
my first
okay.
board was in 2009, actually, and that was a company called On Green, and it was a marketplace for clean tech investments. I'd been an advisor to a clean tech competition called Clean Tech Open, and got to know a lot of startups in that space. And then fast forward to the larger corporate boards. In 2021, I joined the board of KBRA, and That was through the public affairs representative of this company, Lendistry, where I served as the chief investment officer. So they knew my work and thought I'd be a good fit. And then Mission Advancement Corp, I learned about that opportunity through LCDA. Some of the other boards I've heard about through my network and through other connections. And I think there's so many opportunities right now when it comes to joining these boards. I think we all have to be very cognizant about conflicts. And being on the board of CalPERS, I have many. So I am happy to refer opportunities to LCDA and other talented candidates.
Excellent. So, how important was it to put in the work to raise your public profile and promote yourself, your public persona, to get in your board seats? Do you want to start, Stacy?
Sure. And in my case, it wasn't that important. It really was based on the work that I've done. And in some cases, I have to be very careful about promoting my profile, particularly for CalPERS and now that I'm a presidential nominee. However, I will say that doing a TV show recently has helped other people understand what I do. So I've been in the blockchain space. I've worked with early stage companies and institutional capital. And I think some people start to hear about that and tune out and don't understand the relationship between finance, tech, and policy. But now that I've been able to do it in an accessible format through TV, I think it's really helping others understand how these different backgrounds can come together and how people who aren't traditionally viewed as board members will make outstanding ones.
Excellent. What about you, Bernadette?
Yeah,
How did
I
you
think
raise your
it's a really important topic. I think especially in today's day and age, in terms of the today modern board member, I don't know that maybe 5 or 10 years ago, people were really worried about being perceived as social and digital thought leaders, right? But I think that the bar is somewhat raised, and I think certainly. The first place that someone looks when they hear your name professionally is obviously your LinkedIn profile, right? And so I do think that there's a certain amount of, I love what you said, Stacy. It's really about highlighting and showcasing what makes you unique. And if you have thought leadership pieces, if once again, I mean, another piece is that people sometimes know you professionally in one capacity, um, but there's a variety of different areas of expertise and interest, and that maybe is not so evident and not so apparent. And so I think that having and curating, I would say, your public persona is important. And whether that's, as Stacy mentioned, everything from TV to sitting on panels, where I think there's a real opportunity for people to see you in action in areas of expertise, to frankly, even just the type of commentary that one makes on LinkedIn, right? When you see an article, a friend. And so I think all of that begins to shape how people perceive you in terms of your capacity. And board service is it's I always remind people, it's not so much like what's the job that you've been in last, right? Because as a board member, you're not there to do the work. You are there to advise in a variety of capacities. So almost the broader you can be and really showcasing both your passion and the depth of knowledge and your interest in the areas that many, many companies are facing, or certainly the companies that you'd be interested in. I think that has become a greater I hate to say it, but it really is almost like table stakes now. The expectations, it's not just, do I have a professional bio and do I have my resume? It's what do I look like publicly? Am I seen as a thought leader in these areas? And I think just being very thoughtful about that is important.
Absolutely. What do you think, Anilu?
Yeah, I think some of us, our jobs actually require that we are vocal. I see myself as the voice of the employees of TPG, and not just for ourselves, but also on behalf of our over 200 portfolio companies. So I maybe was lucky that I was afforded a platform that made it a little bit more comfortable because I'm a little bit more reserved. So I think that that came as part of the job, but I agree that the more important thing is what may people not know about you that may not also be obvious from your bio, because all of us have had, certain experiences, sometimes even very, difficult experiences that we had to help our companies and organizations navigate. And those nuggets of information are very valuable when you think about board service. So I think, panels, even in your non-for-profit board work, right? Claudia and I had the pleasure of serving in a board together. Um, every opportunity that you get to express the things that matter to you and that you're passionate about and that you have knowledge on, I think are opportunities for people to think about how you could apply that in the board. And I would say LCDA, I'm also a BRI and I would say I was very pleased to see that that was part of the curriculum, how to think about, your public platforms that might be available to you. So definitely it's something to think about. And if you don't have it today as naturally and organically as part of your job, you may want to think about the two or three things that might get you there.
Excellent. So, what has surprised you on the board? You got in, you were able to make it, you are there. What was something unexpected? What was the learning curve? Do you want to start, Stacy?
I have to say, being on corporate boards has been a very welcoming experience. And so there's one board where there's actually another Latina with me, Katia Beauchamp, who's amazing. She just sold Birchbox. It's afforded me the opportunity to connect many different components of my career in a way that other positions haven't allowed me to do. And I think many of us move between worlds, right? Whether it's cultures, whether it's different industries, and being on a board provides this overview, and the responsibility of understanding how things interact within a company and an industry and regulation. And so it's been intellectually enriching and incredibly rewarding.
Excellent. Bernadette?
Well, I think being the question was what surprised me or certainly was new. And again, as you onboard different boards, right, your experience changes. And so every time there's kind of something new. But
Yes.
I think getting back to the question of my very first board, when you're a rookie, I think that there's a lot to learn, right? I think, and what's interesting for me about this is that we all, and by the way, audience included, are operating at the highest level professionally, right? We've kind of all arrived. We're at, we're managing multi-billion-dollar portfolio companies. I mean, it's just interesting that professionally, it's almost like, you've reached this stage of expertise. And yet, when you now step into board work, all of a sudden there's a learning curve. And it is a very different process. I can obviously speak to my experience having been an operating executive all of my career. There's a little bit of learning in terms of how to be an effective board member. And like I said earlier, your job is really to ask great questions. It's not necessarily to provide the answers, right? And when for some of us who've kind of come from executive backgrounds where you're used to kind of having the answer in the room, it's a different dynamic, right? And certainly also now you're working with a very diverse and collaborative, hopefully, team of board members, and having perspective and bringing everyone's voice to the table. And I think that those are things that you learn when you first start. I would say for me, I definitely felt like I listened a lot in my first year. I still felt like I really wanted to absorb and kind of understand the board dynamics and understand the best way to be effective in whether driving change or asking good questions. And so I always advise people that rather than just kind of jump in, I mean, it's great to kind of sit back a little bit and listen. The other thing I was really fortunate is my first board was great from a governance perspective in terms of matching and putting new members with mentors, right? And so sometimes you have some really what seem like dumb questions that you don't want to ask in a room of like extraordinarily, experienced people. And so I think that having someone that you can kind of really go to and say, like, tomorrow, like, what's the attire, as and by the way, these are some really basic questions, but it's amazing how quickly one can feel like the new kid in school. And so I think for me it was really just kind of understanding the dynamics of what was different in a boardroom environment versus, kind of this executive environment that I'd come from before. But so that I would say is one piece that I always, caution people. I say ask a lot of questions. The nice thing is that, as somebody who has also now onboarded new board members, in my experience, and I sit on NomGov for one of my. It's nice. You can kind of bring your experience of what you wish you would have been asked. I said to somebody, one of the companies I'm on the board has speaks in acronyms, and it was like my very first meeting, and I raised my hand and I was like, I apologize, I'm the new person, but can you tell me what these mean? And it was very funny because 2 seconds later, someone who's been on the board for a number of years said, I'm so glad you asked. I've always just felt too embarrassed to ask. And I feel like I've been here too long to go back and say, what was that again? So I think also just realize that sometimes being new and coming in fresh and asking questions is just as valuable to these existing boards. So that would be kind of one of my experiences for sure.
Absolutely. So, Anilu, what are the lessons learned in the first to second to 2 years of serving on your boards? What wisdom can you share with others?
Yeah, I think the interview process for boards is very critical, not just for you making the decision, but actually in terms of how that first to second year will look like, and really interrogating, the culture of the board. Because like any organization, there is a culture, it's very distinct. And it's both a group dynamic, but there are important parts of how the tone gets set. Obviously the CEO plays a really important part in that too, but obviously the chair of the board as well. And so I to me was glad that I spent the time to talk to every member of the board, and then also other people that are important to the functioning of the board meetings, like the general counsel. I probably spent the most amount of time after the CEO and the chair of the board with the general counsel on my onboarding process and making my decision, and it really paid off. Those people have an incredible amount of knowledge both about the company and about what it is to be a board member. So I would say that. And then I would say, a lot of work happens outside of the boardroom, in follow up meetings and individual meetings. And again, different companies do it differently. Our CEO in Upwork has individual meetings with every board member before each meeting to get, what's on their mind and all of that. But then I'll connect with her on things that might be in my area of expertise that they might be going on. So making yourself valuable doesn't always have to be by being the person who speaks the most in the boardroom. As long as you find your niche on how you're going to contribute to the strategy and to help people think through, as Bernadette said, we're not there as operators. And so you have to resist the temptation of managing the company, which I know is hard for some of us. But actually, at the same time, really what is useful to them. That's what they really need. And so, yeah, that's what I would say, Claudia, that, a lot of the action happens outside of the boardroom, and make sure you do your homework on your way in.
Can I just
Excellent.
jump on something Anilu said? I think
Yeah.
it's super important to really ask them, what do they need you to do? Right? Remember, there's a very discrete reason that you were selected as a board member, right? So clearly they're very thoughtful about areas of expertise or, white space where they feel that they need additional experience. And, one of my boards in particular, like Denny's, people are always like, wow, you're in food. That's interesting. They were very purposeful about going and getting a board member that did not come from the restaurant industry because the rest of the board has that experience. So I think the important piece also up front is to ask, like, how can I be of use? And you're right, Anilu. Oftentimes it doesn't necessarily mean in the board meetings. There's a lot of work that is done externally. In my case, I've been partnered with our DE&I head because that's a passion of mine, and we've done some good work there. Our chief marketing officer, someone I mentor, and another, because that's the need. And so I think asking and being very upfront, right, about understanding what role they want you to play, I think is an important one. I think, in particular, I'm going to say this about first boards. People for first boards, you feel like you're auditioning for them, like you so want this first board, right? And so there's a part of you that you're auditioning for them. But I always say, part of this process is that you are also asking and wanting to vet them as well. And so, it does have to be a two-way conversation. And I always tell, especially first-time board members who are in the first process of their very first interviews for their very first board, it's, not to be shy, to really be purposeful about asking, why me? Why are we having this conversation? What about my profile, my background is going to be helpful on your board? Because if a company can't articulate to you why you specifically, other than, by the way, being Latina or being a woman, well, we're all here to do work and be productive. So I think that's an important piece, is to really ask questions and to ask them, how can you be of use?
Yes, this is exactly where we wanted to go next, which is let's talk about diversity, let's talk about culture, and let's talk about board dynamics. Is there much diversity on the boards that you're serving? And what about cultural fit? Are you the only woman, the only Latina, the only woman of color on these boards? So, Stacy, do you want to start?
Sure. And I think I touched on that a little bit in the last question because it was such a surprise to me. So on Mission Advancement Corp, there are 3 women of color on that board. It is primarily diverse, and that was by design, very much with the leadership of the board, including Colin Kaepernick. And so it's phenomenal. And I have to say, in that regard, when it comes to my board experience, I have always found the culture to be very inclusive, and I'm able to bring my full self, oftentimes in ways that I haven't been able to do in jobs that I've held. So it's been incredibly rewarding in that regard. Um, as I think about my role and what I bring there, especially as a Latina, it's just this idea that we level up and we avail our value, right? So we bring all of us to our meetings and share what we have, we just contribute. And I think that's so key. Bernadette, your point about listening is so important. When you first joined the board, I was in between listening and then just jumping right in because it's like, wait, there's this on the ESG front or on the regulatory front. And it's been great to be in these environments where I can bring all these different aspects of my career to bear.
Excellent. Anilu?
I'm the 4th woman on my board. And actually, that was one of the things that really attracted me, that they were not just doing this because it's fashionable or they have, a bucket list now that they have to fulfill. And 2
And
of
the
us are
CEO is also a woman, right?
in the CEO as a woman, which I think has a ton to do. But the chair of the board and the nominating committee is a white man, and he has been very, very focused on making sure that that is something that he's well networked in our community so that he can select the right board members. So I'm the second woman of color to join them as well. So we need to get another Latina on, and I have told them that that will hopefully be one of my contributions to the board, that I'm not the only Latina on it. And I think that there's a lot that is a perfect example of something that you can do as a board member, to make sure that they know the right Latinas, Latinos, and people of color, in general, LGBTQ. We all benefit when the board is more diverse.
What do you think, Bernadette?
Yeah, so I'm gonna say I'm gonna split it because I feel so extraordinarily lucky. Like Stacy, my very first board was Denny's, and it is like the poster board, I think, of public board companies. I mean, what an incredibly diverse group of people in all ways. Um, you know, so the other piece that you mentioned is like, are you the first? And I think to a certain degree, if you're not the first woman and you're not the first person of color, one of the things that I'm finding more and more that a lot of colleagues of our peers of mine are talking about who have joined boards is you're oftentimes one of the first people who are under a certain age. So what's interesting is also to see the changing complexion and demographics of board service, and that in itself is also sometimes a first. My other board, and this is going to go to Anilu's point, um, I am the first woman of color on that board, but they were very purposeful because they want this next evolution of the board to continue to evolve. So oftentimes what's great is that you get to come on board as really that change agent, right? And where your charge is going to be to help the board, move forward, bring on new and a diverse set of new board members. And I love that. I love that for so many of us being first, only means, right, that we're able to kind of bring along, as Anilu said, everyone with us. And so that was been on the public side. I know we haven't ventured too much into the private side, but when you're on, interestingly enough, on the private, in particular VC backed, um, oftentimes you are the first independent director that they have. So there's a lot of firsts, and but I always look as firsts as real opportunity to do the work, and to really, and I take that responsibility very seriously of like, well, I'm here, so great, let's open the door as wide as we can.
Excellent. So we are running out of time, but I have so many questions, and there are a lot of questions coming in here. But tell me, what do you want to share with Latinas who are interested in joining boards? What type of board service should you be looking at? And what is the type of diligence that you do when you're thinking about joining a board? Bernadette, do you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, I'll dovetail on what I said. A couple of pieces of advice that I tell people all the time. One, most importantly, is why. Why do you want to be on a board? I think that's an important question to ask yourself. What about board service is interesting to you? What type of board would you like to be on? Do you like to travel? Do you like to meet 4 times a year or 12 times a year? Like, all of these things are very important in ultimately determining what kind of boards you should be interviewing for. So I think the why of board service is very important. The second piece is hand in hand, which is, historically we've thought of board as progression, as like the nirvana is getting to sit on a public board company. Like it's like progression. I started nonprofits and then I kind of work my way up. And I just think all of that has changed. I think that, again, back to the why, public board service has a very specific style, and you need to know if that's something that's of interest to you. I like splitting the two, and I always say my third piece of advice to people is to think of board service as like portfolio, right? I think you have to be as purposeful, as strategic as you've been in your professional career, but now I'm in kind of board service. It's, what are the skill sets I want to use? How do I, what are the types that I want to kind of put together so that I feel fulfilled as a board member? And public company board service, like I said, it tends to be more structured. private company board service, oftentimes for those of us who like to roll up our sleeves and do a little bit more advising on the strategy piece, that can be very fulfilling, right? Because that's really why you're brought on in some cases, is really to help think through early stages of growth and monetization, which is different. And so that's part of it. Is I think you've got to know that there are a variety of different ways to serve on boards, and the types of companies are also going to be different. So do your homework, meet with other people who currently sit on those types of boards, and kind of get more information about what it's like to sit on some of those boards. And certainly, like I said, think of it as a portfolio, and be strategic about it, because again, it's a lot of time, and I don't know that oftentimes people see how much of a commitment it is. You're going to be spending a lot of time on this. You're going to be on planes, you're going to be on evening calls. Believe me, if COVID has taught us anything, for many of us, board service became almost a full-time job, right, in the middle of the pandemic. So you've got to really know that you've got to really make decisions and select things that you're going to enjoy for the long term. And so those, I would say, would be my piece of the advice as you kind of begin to think about that.
What do you think, Anilu?
I think that you should talk to a lot of board members, so that you can pick up on those differences that Bernadette was talking about. I think it's a great step that you have joined this school with LCDA. It's an incredible organization, and when I think about it from the other relationship that we have with LCDA, which we're proud partners at TPG, because we have a strong focus on diversifying the boards of our portfolio companies. And we have actually made a lot of progress in that regard. But we need partners like LCDA to help us, to push us, and to provide the talent that we otherwise maybe are not connected to today. So make sure that you make the time to connect. And then lastly, I would say, it's okay to be on a board in an industry that you are not familiar with, and you'll learn a ton, and you still can be a relevant board member. So don't be fooled by just staying in your lane, and be willing to try other things, because ultimately the why is because it's a very fulfilling role, actually, if you pick it well.
What about you, Stacy? What are your departing words of wisdom
Well, I
before moving
completely
into
agree with Annie
questions?
Lou and Bernadette, so I want to build on that. I would add to that expertise and responsibility when it comes to board service. Expertise not having to be in that particular industry, but in a function that parlays with the rest of the board duties. So maybe it's audit, maybe it's nom and gov, maybe it's a different category. The second part is responsibility, and board service is a tremendous responsibility. As a board member, you bear responsibility for that company and its operations, to its clientele, to its employees, and it's something to take very seriously. So as we talk about the due diligence in the board interview process, that's a key part of it. Is this a company that you want to be responsible for? Are you willing to dedicate the time and energy needed for that? And then also the reputational risk, because it's your career.
Absolutely. So we have a question from Marisol. She's asking, is it better when you join a board to get more educated in the external areas, industry and competition, versus the internal understanding of the company? What should be the priority, internal, external? What about you, Bernadette? What do you think?
I mean, I'm going to say, look, obviously both, right? But I think the internal piece comes over time. I think the external piece is fundamentally why we're there, right? And so I'll dovetail off what Stacy said about, and Anilu, about expertise, right? There's specific expertise, and obviously your background and a lot of what you bring to the table. But a lot of the responsibility of board members is also to be educated about what's happening externally, and to continue to get educated about what's happening externally. So I think that external is probably, especially in the initial phase, probably more important. The internal piece, of course, you're going to learn over time, and you're going to certainly as you onboard onto a board. Um, but I would say like the external piece and being able to connect the dots in terms of what's happening externally, trends, issues that are ultimately going to be of tremendous importance to the company, whether it's the company itself or the industry itself or how it's being disrupted. To me, those are all kind of big picture external items. And that, I would say, in my opinion, is probably really what's expected, right, of a board member. Once you're on a board, by the way, the learning doesn't stop. You know, we've all gone through tremendous transformation on companies as big companies are now really actively thinking very differently about human capital, about ESG, a lot of topics, cybersecurity that, over time have really become more important. And as board members, guess what? Your job is to make sure that you're constantly educating yourself about the issues and learning best practices that perhaps are happening not necessarily just in the industry, but are happening elsewhere, and bringing that to the boardroom.
Stacy, what would you like to add?
I completely agree. And I would say one of the blessings of being on a board or serving on a board is that the learning happens concurrently and constantly. So as external factors change, there are questions being asked about what we're doing internally to respond to that, how we've prepared in the past, how we're being proactive. So oftentimes, again, in my experience, it's not one or the other. They are happening at the same time. And I think that's how it should be.
Anilu, your last comment?
I think I'm going to focus then on how you do that. I think that a wonderful way to learn about the company is through its employees, through the management team. So make time for them as well, not just for the CEO.
Excellent. So I'm going to share with you my key takeaways from today. Hopefully they'll be in everyone's notes, but let me share them with you and then we'll get into a lightning road. Be vocal about your goals of being on a board, connections, the power of such connections and networks. Build your network. LCDA as a key connector and training mechanism for joining a board. Understand what you bring to the board, understand what you do, and make that narrative be known and understood by others. Work on your social, digital presence as board leader. LinkedIn profile and what makes you unique. Curating your public persona, TV panels, social media, shape the perception of your capacity and your skills. Board members as advisors, not as executors. Share your passion, your depth of knowledge, and use your not-for-profit board to do it as well, because you have an expectation of thought leadership. Use your voice to be the voice of the employees, like Anilu said, or really speak on behalf of others. It's an opportunity to connect the different paths of your different careers into one place. And you, as Latinas, I think we have a special skill in moving across different worlds. Responsibility of joining a board, the intellectual curiosity that you all shared, a lot to learn. It's a huge learning curve sometimes, and how to be an effective board member has a lot to do with listening a lot and asking a lot of questions. Make sure you focus on your interview process. Make sure you focus on the culture of the board, on the group dynamics, and the tone that gets set from the top. Take the time to meet every board member, including the GC, the chair of the board, and the CEO. Make yourself valuable. Find your niche on how you contribute to the board. Resist temptation to manage the company. Do your homework. Ask them what they need you to do. Ask them, why are they considering you? Why me? Diverse by design. It really showed how intentional companies are being in having a diverse board that will hopefully translate into better results. Level up. Bring your contributions to the meeting. Bring other diversity candidates to the board as another key differentiator and contribution. Be a diverse change agent. Think of your why on joining a board. Board service as strategic as you have been in your career. Full-time job in times of crisis. Talk to other board members. Stretch your skills if you're joining a board that is outside of your comfort zone. So these are my key takeaways, which are can't thank you enough, incredibly valuable. And we have 1 minute that I want to make sure we use for a lightning rod. So I want one word answers. Bernadette, how do you spend your me time?
Oh, with my kids. I have 3 girls, and it's been a joy to just be with them and spend so much time with them. Now they're starting to go away as COVID, starts to end.
Excellent. Stacy, what's your most recent Netflix binge?
Oh, there hasn't been anything recent, and that's a problem. I think the last one, and this shows you how long it's been, was Bridgerton, which was in January.
Anilu, what book are you reading?
Oh, this is boring, but I'm Colin Powell. His my story, I have read it before, and I'm rereading him because of his passing.
Excellent.
I have, wait,
What
I
about
have a change. Monarca.
Monarca?
Very
Okay,
powerful.
excellent. Bernadette, what is your next vacation spot?
Booked it today. Punta Cana.
Excellent. Anilu, what is a habit you acquired during the pandemic?
Wearing only leggings.
Stacy,
Lululemon
what is?
stock is up.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. Stacy, what is your next conference that you'll be attending?
Oh, I don't have anything booked right now.
Oh, I'm glad to hear. That's
Oh,
good.
no. I'm going to be in Switzerland in June.
Excellent. Amazing. Wonderful. I can't thank you enough for sharing such great and thoughtful, thought provoking inspirations and thought leadership with us today. We need to make sure we see more Latinas just like you joining boards of every type of company, public or private, because there's no doubt that with this talent, we're adding tons of value to these companies. So we are incredibly proud of you. You guys made it. And please spread the wealth. Have a great day. And thanks again for being here. Bye bye.
Thank you for
Thank
having
you.
us.
Thank you, Claudia.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
everyone.
Thank you.